Hello, everyone. My name is Josh, and I am a medical student at the University of Wisconsin School of Medicine and Public Health that's working with the Wisconsin Voices for Recovery. Today, we're joined by Jason, a member of our local community who both advocates for recovery and is in recovery himself. And I wanted to kind of preface this with, given that the goal of these chats is to really help address the stigma surrounding people in recovery around Wisconsin, I want to acknowledge that leading up to this interview, Jason and I discovered that we had quite a lot in common, and that unfortunately both of us have lost an immediate family member to substance use, which is actually part of what brought us together today to talk more about recovery and this very important discussion. With that said, I will kind of turn things over to Jason to hear a little bit more about who he is and his story.
Hey, Josh. Thanks so much. And once again, deeply sorry for the loss that you have endured. It is losing somebody close, a sibling, specifically is very challenging. And what I do in the local community is a few things. Number one, I'm a person in recovery.
Mhm.
Number two, I run a nonprofit organization that raises funds for individuals in the state of Wisconsin. And those funds go to different nonprofit organizations throughout the state to provide education and awareness surrounding substance use disorder, as well as helping pay for people to get into various levels of treatment. It could be detox, it could be residential inpatient, it could be sober living. And my day job, I work for an organization called Recovery Centers of America.
Mhm.
And the facility that I support is located down in St. Charles, Illinois. My job there is to really build a network to help people get into treatment. And when they leave treatment, get them to a safe place. So it could be sober living, could be PHP, could be
Mhm.
IOP, but really just building a strong network here in Wisconsin. And um, that's something that needs to be talked about, I think, more and more. There are a lot of great providers in the state of Wisconsin and a lot of people that are working towards a common goal,
Mhm.
but aren't necessarily maybe working as closely together as I think personally is necessary to help combat substance use disorder. Um, we've seen the numbers rising annually of the number of people who are dying from overdoses, um, and really not that much more support or awareness or education out there. And you talked about it, in the beginning, stigma. Stigma is strong, especially here in Wisconsin, where we have a culture of drinking and getting blackout. And you go to
Mhm.
Madison and you live there, and so I'm sure you experience it on an almost weekly basis of hearing stories and seeing people. And that was a part of my life for a long time. I was a binge drinker, I guess is probably the
Mhm.
easiest way of classifying it. Didn't drink every day, might not drink every week, but when I drank, we went deep. Um,
Mhm.
no volume control for me, just an on and off switch, and when it was on, it was cranked up to the max. Um, and I think between that and dealing with my own mental health issues, I'm also bipolar. Um, and so when I would be drinking and having a manic episode, um, I would then partake in different substances.
Mhm.
Um, and the one that got me probably in the most trouble, um, not financially, not with the law, just in trouble, was I was addicted to OxyContin
Mhm.
for, I would say, probably 6 months or so. Had a shoulder surgery, and a physician who continued to prescribe um, a lot of narcotics to me on a monthly basis. And um, it started with me partying with my buddies
Mhm.
um, on the weekends, and then it kind of was wake up in the morning, and I'll just snort a little line
Mhm.
because I want to. Um, and then that kind of turned into me, you know, giving it to my friends, and um, then I was the only one doing it.
Mhm.
and I'd be at friends' parents' houses in their basement bathroom, and I'd bring my razor blade and my mirror and my pills, and could be just watching a Packers game or whatever, and I would disappear for 20 or 30 minutes and then come
Mhm.
back. And um, I'm very grateful that I have a lot of really, really, really great people in my life, because I had a few very close friends who came to me and told me, "Hey, man, this is an issue, and you got to stop it." And my immediate response was, "Dude, we're just partying." And he said it may have started that way, um,
Mhm.
but it's Wednesday at 10 a.m. and you're high, and um, it's it's unique and interesting to a certain extent to talk about my own recovery, because I don't think if you would have asked me, when I was 19 years old or 20 years old starting Oxycontin, was I addicted to it? I would have said no. And I actually don't think I even realized um, that I had an addiction until several years later, like 10 or 12 years later,
Mhm.
when I look back at all of the signs and the withdrawal and everything that I experienced. And that was a really emotional moment for me personally. Because again, I thought I was just partying. Everybody's partying. We're drinking. We're snorting some pills. We're doing, some other stuff as well. Um, but I think that's how a lot of times this starts is, a group of people doing something, could be any
Mhm.
substance. And for certain people, it doesn't stop, and you don't realize you're the only one that's still doing it.
Mhm.
And support, I think, is huge in this space, and we're getting there in Wisconsin. There are some really great organizations that do amazing things, but there are still limitations to individuals here in the state, um, who either don't have a job or no insurance or on state Medicaid, where not everything is paid for. Um, but I was a part of a really awesome event a couple weeks ago in Madison with
Mhm.
41 organizations in the state that came together for a full day to talk about recovery. Um, and so I think doing things like that and getting it out
Mhm.
into the public and having the news cover it and the papers write about it, social media posts, and all those things are going to be really awesome. Um, but this needs to be a grassroots movement. Um, Nobody in local, state, or federal government in the
Mhm.
foreseeable future, in my opinion, is going to come down and fix this. Um, so I think getting educated and knowing the warning signs and just doing some Google work and trying to figure out what signs to look for if you have children or somebody who you think might be drinking too much or doing another substance.
Yeah. And I think one of the common threads that I am seeing in kind of your story, and really what I've heard from others too, is that there's this always seems to be this moment where the people around you are influencing you for better or worse. And there's that moment where you didn't realize you had an addiction at the time. It was friends, family, so on, being able to identify that and having that candid conversation to get you to the next step and in the path to recovery.
Yeah, and I want to talk about my brother a little bit and his story, and I think this kind of
Mhm.
parallels really well. Um, while I was in my active addiction, I was living back at my parents' house, and my brother is 3.5 years younger than me.
Mhm.
Um, and at that point, he was already using pills, and I had no idea. So again, I was partying, I was being the cool older brother. Maybe I'd slip him a pill, maybe I'd crush up a pill for him, talk to him about why I was doing it or whatever. And um, so you see, I don't have any older siblings, so I'm kind of assuming this is how this works: is you see
Mhm.
your older sibling, um, successful, um, playing athletics in college, going to college, and then partaking in this extracurricular activity, um, and thinking it's okay.
Mhm.
Um, and that is some of the guilt that I have to live with for the rest of my life. Because my initial thought when I think about this and talk about this is, what if he never saw me doing it, or what if I never offered him a pill?
Mhm.
Would he have continued to use? Um, and the answer is I don't know. Um, but I also know there were some influences around him, and he probably influenced people as well. I'm not going to sit here and say that somebody made my brother do his first pill and then that was it.
Mhm.
But there are quite a few kids from his graduating class that are no longer here, and almost every single one of them has been in heroin overdose. Um, Most recent one might have been fentanyl, but these are kids that I took to t-ball or baseball practice or soccer practice, or picked up from football. Came from good families and had food and shelter, um, and that comes back to the stigma of, oh, it's just some person with a brown paper bag living under a bridge. Like,
Mhm.
those people exist, absolutely, um, but this disease doesn't discriminate. So doctors, lawyers, surgeons, nurses, teachers, you name it, every single person is touched. It doesn't matter your age, your gender, your race, your, anything. It is, you know, 10 years ago, you would ask somebody a question. Hey, do you ever know anybody who, had cancer or died of cancer? And everybody would go, yeah, obviously.
Mhm.
Um, Now, I think if you asked most people if they know somebody who either uses heroin or opioids, or drinks too much or has died from that, I think you'd get a near 100% response in yes. um, and again, coming back to Wisconsin, it's like, okay, you're going to a Brewers game, what do? You tailgate and you get drunk. You're watching the Bucks playoff game, what are you doing? You got a drink in your hand, you're at a bar.
Mhm.
You're having your kid's birthday party. There's multiple coolers of beer at every kid's birthday party I think I've ever attended, in the state of Wisconsin. Um, and I think a lot of people think, well, that's how it is everywhere. It's not. I've lived in other states, and I've gone to housewarming parties and different events, and come with a 6-pack of beer and a bottle of wine, and gotten looks like, "What are you doing, man? It's my kid's third birthday," and it's like,
Mhm.
oh, well, this is just, I'm from Wisconsin. This is what we do. Um, so it's it's a very challenging thing to overcome in the state. Um, but I want to get back to my brother. Sorry, I kind of went off topic there a little bit. But
Oh no, totally okay.
my brother started using pills, we think, around the age of 16.
Mhm.
We don't know for sure. Um, but he's incredibly intelligent. Um, Very high IQ, photographic memory. But in his junior and senior year of high school, he started to struggle. And
Mhm.
my parents couldn't really put a finger to it, like what was going on. Um, and I was living out of state at the time, and it was about a week before his high school graduation. And I got a phone call that I'm never going to forget, because he said, "Hey, Jay, you don't have to come home for graduation. I'm not walking." And I was just kind of like, wait, what do you mean you're not walking? Like, you could teach those classes. Like, what's going on? And he's like,
Mhm.
he was very transparent. He said, listen, I'm struggling with a little bit of a pill addiction. But I got this, and, I'm just going to quit and then finish school in the summer and get my diploma and then figure out what I'm going to do. And because of my own experience of being able to quit the way that I did, I just said, okay, cool, man, do it. Let me know when you're off them, and I'll come see you this summer, and I love you, and, stay safe.
Mhm.
And we didn't talk about it for probably another year. And I don't remember the exact moment or what happened, but I remember my parents saying, "Hey, we're actually a little bit worried about Terry.
Mhm.
Um, he's sleeping late. He's sometimes missing work. We can't wake him up some mornings, and he's not eating. He's losing weight, like all these things." And so we just started doing research as a family, um, but not talking about it, because in Delafield in 2007, Nobody talked about heroin.
Mhm.
Nobody talked about addiction. And so we just did our own research, and he did some stints at detox, and he went to an inpatient facility and left against medical advice. He personally said he was not a big fan of the 12 steps and just felt like he could do it himself. And so we continued to just agree with him. You are so intelligent. Why would somebody as smart as you not be able to stop this? Because
Mhm.
that's what we thought it was. We thought it was just, you're smart enough to stop. We didn't realize the depth at what his addiction was really at. And um, so I started to get a little bit more involved and have more conversations with him. Like, hey man, like I found this place. It looks pretty nice. I think, you should go try treatment, or I think you should go to a therapist, or maybe we should go to a meeting, or, listing off all these different things. All the while, I'm still binge drinking and blacking out and using other drugs. Oh, and by the way, if somebody had an oxy, I would still take it. So I just kept thinking, like, well, if I could do it, like, I'm not near as smart as he is, and I don't have the mental fortitude that he has. So, like, if I could do it, he could do it. And then I got a phone call from him that I will never forget. One of his best friends died of a heroin overdose.
Mhm.
Um, and that really scared me, because to that point, we still thought it was just pills, right? You
Mhm.
think if it comes from a doctor, you're not going to die from it. And it shook him. It shook him to his core. And so once again, we said, okay, Terry, one of your best friends just died from this. Like, we got to stop. Oh, no, 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 no. He was doing heroin, and I'm just snorting pills. It's not that big of a deal. Um, and then he broke up with his girlfriend, somebody who he cared very deeply about, and somebody who he lied to on multiple occasions. And she finally realized what he had been doing. Because again, I'm the big brother. I'm not a snitch. I'm not going to tell his girlfriend that he's snorting pills. Like, that's not my place. I don't want to get him in trouble with his girlfriend. I don't want them to fight because I said something I shouldn't have said.
Mhm.
Um, and it went downhill fairly quickly after that. And so we would have conversations like, hey, you still just doing pills? You haven't touched heroin, have you? No, 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 I haven't touched heroin. Um, and then 6 months later, hey, pills are super expensive, so I'm just snorting heroin. But like, don't worry, you can't overdose from snorting heroin.
Mhm.
And that was kind of the thought in his circle of friends. And I think to a lot of people, maybe even today, that's still a thought, that if you're not injecting heroin into your body with a needle, that you can't die. And I don't know how we fix that.
Yeah.
Like, that's like, I don't know how we fix that part of it.
One of the language quirks that I kind of pick up on sometimes is this attitude of, oh, it's just this or just that, or even the statement of, hey, why don't you just stop, or something like that. And it seems like that's this trap almost to have that kind of thinking, right?
Yeah, because if it was easy to just stop,
Yeah.
then people would do that. But people need a support system,
Mhm.
um, and people need to know that it's okay, and that they're not going to be looked down upon by somebody. But unfortunately, you can still be discriminated against for substance use disorder. You can still lose your job for having a
Mhm.
substance use disorder. Um, I don't know anybody that's been fired for having diabetes or cancer.
Mhm.
I don't know anybody who would ever say, hey, my brother's a diabetic because he eats too much cake. But you hear people say, well, if that person wouldn't have had that first drink, or if that person wouldn't have taken that pill, they wouldn't
Mhm.
be in the situation that they're in. Um, and I hope for those people that they're never affected by this disease, because it's terrible. Um, and I I like that you bring up the language thing though, because I hear it even today in the job that I do. I hear it from the nonprofit work that I do. I hear it from people when I'm speaking. I hear it from parents and spouses and children of individuals suffering from substance use disorder. Like, they should just stop. Don't they see what this is doing to the family and doing to themselves?
Mhm.
And those people probably have moments where they realize that, but they don't. This disease grips people in different ways, and each person's story is different, and what trauma led to that decision to to get sucked into this disease, or the hereditary nature of what's in their family, and what, were their parents struggling with substance use disorder? Did they see it a lot when they were children? Did their parents take them to bars when they were 5 years old? Because you can do that in Wisconsin. Like, um, all these things that happen. But I want to jump back to my brother, because I think this next portion of his story, although very tragic, is
Mhm.
very important. And so, um, you know, I I somewhat separated myself from my brother unintentionally.
Mhm.
Um, I wasn't calling him as frequently. I saw what he was doing to his parents, my parents, like putting them through hell.
Mhm.
Um, my mom really struggling, my dad not understanding what's going on, my parents fighting about, well, you gave him $10 to go get cigarettes and now he's getting high, or you let him use the car, or
Mhm.
and like that starts to happen. Um, and then he really starts to look different. Um, Starts to lose quite a bit of weight. Um, when I go over there for family functions and events, we used to do dinner every Thursday night with my parents and my grandparents and my brothers, and it was just this big fun thing.
Mhm.
And he wasn't coming down from his room, and he worked a double last night and he's really tired. Um, and at this point, we still didn't know that he was injecting. Um, and and at some point in time, roughly 6 to 9 months before he eventually passed away, we heard from friends that he had started to inject, and he didn't know what he was doing, and he was using a needle that was too big, and wasn't testing his drugs before he was using them, and wasn't using the same amount every time, and he hated needles. I mean, hated
Mhm.
them. I hate needles. Like, I go give blood, I gotta like mentally prep myself that, like, hey, you're gonna be okay, that needle's going in your arm, but like, it's fine. And that's how he was. So for him to get to a point to actually inject the substance into his body, to me, means that he was really past the point of no return. Um,
Mhm.
and then for some reason, we kind of got re-engaged there, and you know, every phone conversation that we would have would end with me crying, begging him, please let me get you to a rehab. Well, Jay, you can't afford it. I got money in my 401k. Like, we'll figure it out. We'll ask somebody for a loan. We have family members that would care about you. And he would always say, don't tell anybody. Don't tell anybody. Um, and I didn't.
Mhm.
You know, my two best friends knew, my three best friends knew, one of my cousins knew, my brother knew, and my parents. And that was it. And I vividly remember having a conversation with him one time, um, probably about 6 months before he died, 5 months before he died. And I said, hey man, I found this place in South America, and we can go do this thing called Ibogaine. I don't know anything about it, but apparently it works really well for people who are struggling with opioids and
Mhm.
heroin. And he couldn't allow somebody to help him. He had to do it himself. He wouldn't be in debt to anybody for money. He just didn't want to do it. But we started to see more of his friends dying, and we kind of got to this place. I got to this place personally, that I started going back to therapy. And one of the reasons I went back to therapy was to help that therapist prepare me for my brother's eventual death.
Mhm.
Um, which, by the way, you can't do. You can do all the research and you can learn all the things about grief and you can do everything you want to do. Nothing will prepare you for the phone call that I got on October 1st of 2014. And he was doing well. My parents were randomly drug testing him. He'd come home late, they'd drug test him. He
Mhm.
failed the first one and then started passing them. And so, he was still using cannabis. But as a family, we were like, you know what? If he's going to smoke a joint and not snort heroin, we're okay with that.
Mhm.
Okay. And like that might ruffle feathers in the recovery community with some folks who are 100% abstinence. But our opinion at that point was, if he needs to use a mind altering substance um, to survive, cannabis was the one that we were comfortable with for him. He
Mhm.
wasn't a big drinker. Um, and so we figure he was in recovery. We think somewhere between 3 and 4 months. Um, he went out with his buddies to a bar. They were playing some pool. Um, he got a text from the dope man, and he went. And my mom had some foreshadowing into that evening. When he went to leave that night, my mom said, "I don't have a good feeling about you leaving tonight. Please stay home." And he said, "No, I'm good. I'm not using. Everything's good." And she's like, "I know, but like just something doesn't feel right. Please don't go." He's like, "No, I'm with these buddies and everything was good." And what he ended up doing was he left where he was and went down into Milwaukee and bought a very potent bag of heroin. Um,
Mhm.
and some of the circumstances surrounding his death are still unclear. Was he by himself? Was he left? We don't know.
Mhm.
But my parents had a knock at the door that next morning, sometime around 7:30 or 8 a.m., with a detective from the Milwaukee Police Department, as well as the chief of police from Delafield, where my folks live, to give my parents the news. Um, and I was on the road for work. I was on a work trip. I
Mhm.
was flying to Nashville. I had a really early flight. I texted with him the night before. He was supposed to watch my dog. We had a wedding the next weekend. And I just said, like, "Hey, can you watch the dog? I hope everything's good." Um, and he said, "Yeah, I'm great. Going out with some buddies." And that was the last time I texted with him. And so I get to Detroit to change planes.
Mhm.
I get a call from my cousin, who I worked with at the time. And do you ever get a phone call, or you're in a place and something doesn't feel right? You get tinglies, you get nervous, your heart starts racing, you start sweating.
Mhm.
When I looked at the phone and I saw it was my cousin, that's the feeling I got. When I picked up, she said, "Jay, where are you?" And I said, "I'm on an airplane in Detroit
Mhm.
heading to Nashville." And she said, "Well, you got to get off the plane." And I said, "Why?" Like, I'm traveling, but I got to go to this event. She's like, you got to get off the plane and call your parents."
Mhm.
And I was like, "You got to tell me what's going on." And she just said, "Just get off the plane, call your parents." And so my immediate reaction went to, something happened to my nephew, who at that point was 6 months old,
Mhm.
or one of my grandparents, or something like that. It never crossed my mind that it was my brother, because he was 3 months into recovery. So he had beat this disease.
Mhm.
And I don't know if you've ever tried to get off a plane when the door is closed. It's incredibly difficult. But thankfully, I was able to get off the plane. And as I was walking back to, um, the terminal, my dad answered the phone and was crying. And my dad has showed me so much love in my life, but has never really been an emotional guy. So I would say, to this point, to this phone call, I've probably seen him cry 3 or 4 times in my life. Um, and at that point, that's 8 years ago. So I'd have been 30 years old.
Mhm.
Okay. So I knew something was wrong. And he said, "I can't talk. Here's your brother." And he handed the phone to my youngest brother, Gregory.
Mhm.
Um, and he just said, "Hey, man, you got to come home." And I said, "Everybody keeps telling me that I have to come home, but nobody wants to tell me why I have to come home." And he said, "Terry overdosed." And I
Mhm.
said, "Okay, well, what hospital is he at?" You know? And he's like, "No, no, no, no." He overdosed. And I'm like, "No, no, no, I heard you. Like, where's he at?" We went kind of back and forth in this like really crappy late 80s, early 90s comedy conversation of like,
Mhm.
what's going on? And he said, "No, man, he's dead." They found him in Milwaukee this morning, and he's dead. And I'm in Detroit's airport on a work trip by myself, and the plane that brought me to Detroit had already left to go back to Milwaukee. And so I collapsed. I collapsed on the ground. People didn't know what was going on, and it was like a movie. It was just so surreal. I just kept thinking to myself, like, wake up! Like, this is obviously the worst nightmare ever. Like, you gotta wake up. And I quickly realized it wasn't. And even back then, I had a bunch of group chats with buddies, and they were joking about fantasy football, and I just said, guys, stop. And they said, jokingly, whatever. And I said, no, Terry died, and I just can't do it right now. And sorry, I get back in this place where I remember the conversations and the feelings and the amount of phone calls and text messages that I got from family and friends who had no idea. And that's when I realized that we made a huge mistake. We should have screamed from the top of the mountain that Terry's struggling with heroin, and we need help, and we don't know what to do. And would he got mad at us? Yeah. But would he be here today? I don't know.
Yeah.
And I sat at that airport for 5 hours, and then stopped at a couple bars and bought I went to one of the shops, and I just felt like I wanted to buy something with his name on it, and they didn't have any of those little license things with his name on it. I remember being so mad. And so I bought one that had his middle name on it, which is still on my set of keys. It hasn't left my keys since that day. And I realized at that moment that my parents were not going to be in a place to be able to make those phone calls. And so I took it upon myself to start making those phone calls to family and friends and explain what's going on. And, later that night it hit Facebook, and everybody assumed it was heroin. And I remember going off, and I've deleted all those nasty messages I sent to people about them not knowing what happened, and they weren't there. And I just remember every single time I talked to somebody about him dying, they said, "Oh my, was it a car accident? What happened?" No, it was a heroin overdose, we think. And people were like, "What? I didn't know he was struggling. Why didn't anybody say anything?" And after about the third or the fourth conversation like that, I really, really started to realize that as a family, my brother loved us so much and put so much trust in us, especially his parents and his older brother, to support and protect him. And at that moment, I felt like we failed him. Fast forward 7.5 years. Are there things that we could have and should have done differently? Absolutely. But I don't think we failed him. I think we did what we thought was best and what we thought would keep him alive, which was having conversations and drug testing him, and, being okay with him using cannabis and thinking that that was going to be okay and save his life. And so about 4 months after he died, and still in a really bad place, grief wise and emotionally and depressed, I said, we got to do something, guys. Like, we got to, I don't know what, but like, I plan a bunch of golf outings every year for charitable foundations, and they seem to do well. And so let's do a golf outing, and let's try to raise like $5,000 or $6,000. And our first year we raised $14,000, and the next year we raised $16,000, and the third year we raised $19,000, and then 20, and then 22, and then this past year $30,000. And again, that money stays right here in the state of Wisconsin. We donate everything that we can, with the exception of what I have to keep in the bank account to not get charged a penalty. And the reason that we started it, my reason for starting the golf outing, which we eventually turned into a nonprofit, was not wanting another family to feel the way that we felt. not wanting another family to feel like they could tell somebody that they're close with, or a coworker, or somebody that they love is struggling.
Mhm.
And here we are in 2022, and I'm still having the same conversation. And so my hope is that this conversation between you and I, Josh, that one person sees it and either realizes that they have an issue,
Mhm.
or realizes that one of their family members or somebody that they care about has an issue, and they pick up their phone and they call someone, or they Google something, or they ask their employer if they have an EAP, and if there's any sort of counseling available for that individual. And if that happens,
Mhm.
then everything that we're doing right now, man, is worth it for your loss and for my loss. And I don't, you know, I could talk all day.
Mhm.
We talked about this last week, right? Kind of prepping
Yes.
for this, like, hey, man, you give me a microphone, I'm going to talk, and somebody's gonna have to cut it off when it's done.
Mhm.
Um, but I just want people to realize that the raw emotion of losing my then 26-year-old brother is still here. I can get right back into that moment where I lost him, where we as a family and all of his friends lost him. You know, I'm married. I have 2 children. They've never met him. My
Mhm.
4-year-old will sometimes ask, "Why did Uncle Terry die?"
Mhm.
And we've been very honest with her since a very young age that he had a disease, um, and he was addicted to a substance that was very dangerous, um, and that led to it being his time to leave this physical earth. Um, and so she thinks he ate heroin, um, and I'm okay with that because my kids are going to grow up as educated as any kids in the world, probably, um, about substance use disorder.
Mhm.
But by no means does that mean they're safe. Because remember what I said about my own struggle with addiction and my brother's struggle, and it follows the family tree. So my hope is that we raise these kids to be empathetic and sympathetic and caring, and able to talk to us about what's going on in their circle of friends, and who's using what, who's drinking and who's not, and then just get involved in activities that show them that you don't have to use substances to have fun. So
So I think you've really said it all personally, and I think there's not much more that I can add that wouldn't just be repeating your own story. Um, where really the goal of these conversations is to, break that idea of, this is a private thing, or this is something between me and mom and dad, or that sort of thing.
mhm,
And getting to the point where it is like, say, having diabetes, where like someone will usually say, yeah, I have diabetes, and they'll get help.
mhm.
Or their family member has diabetes, so you help your family member. And I think your openness and honesty about something that was frankly very difficult, um, incredibly difficult, and there's no words to describe it,
Mhm.
is a great step in kind of moving forward and kind of demystifying and removing the stigma around this illness. So I think really that's all the time we have, um, which is okay because I think we've said it all.
Josh, I appreciate the opportunity. Um, you sharing your story with me personally.
Mhm.
Um, what you've decided to do with your life is admirable. Um, and again, I hope that the conversation that we just had here is not the last conversation that you and I have, and that this truly helps somebody either understand
Mhm.
what's going on, or to get help. So I just really appreciate the time.
Absolutely. Thank you.